So Joe Rogan had an interesting statement that he made in his recent podcast with Andrew Yang. He's a 2020 presidential candidate, of course. Joe Rogan is going to make an interesting comment. He's going to explain to us, what made him change his opinion on Bernie Sanders. Now, we all know how Joe Rogan is. You ask him one day about a question, the next day he's got a different answer. But we're also going to take a look at a couple of the other points made in this clip, because they're going to talk about the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and they are going to talk about Bernie Sanders back in 2016. And Andrew Yang is going to also make one correct statement and also one very odd statement. Check it out.
This is got to be taking up a tremendous amount of your time. Like, what do you, are you doing anything else in addition to doing this, or are you setting aside everything else in your life other than your family obligations?
I have two jobs, man. One, help accelerate society to try and deal with this historic transition we're in, and two, stay married. Those are only things I'm about. Wow,
that's a powerful path. Now, when you're looking at the opposition and you're looking at all the other people that are running for president and whether or not they're going to be there by the time the elections roll around, what are you seeing?
It's really interesting, Joe. Holy cow. One of the funnest things about running for president is you run into all the other candidates on the trail in Iowa, in New Hampshire. So I'm like just hanging out backstage with like the gang.
Right.
It's so interesting and fun. It is weird sometimes, but I've really liked most of them. And so sometimes people ask me like, hey, who do you want your running mate to be? And I'm just like, it really depends upon who I just click with best, because we're just going to be on the trail all the time together. So having met a bunch of them, I got to say, most of the candidates are really genuine patriots who just want to try and do something positive, and they see the country's heading in the wrong direction. I could work with most all of them. In terms of who I think is going to be there in the end, man, it's really interesting. One reason I will say that apparently the mainstream press had it out for Bernie last time, where they were just gonna I have a friend who worked in the media, and they were kneecap Bernie.
Why were they gonna kneecap Bernie?
I don't know. It's like there's definitely something going on where like certain corporate media companies have certain candidates they kind of want to tip the scales for a little bit, and then people that they want to like tip it against.
Well, they thought that Bernie was going to get in the way of Hillary winning. Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, they were in the Hillary camp for sure.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't just the media, that was also the DNC, which is now on the record. So now, happily, certainly the DNC has turned a totally different leaf, where the DNC is like, we're not going to do anything that like interferes with anyone's prospects.
Well, what they did was a disaster. A disaster in terms of public image too.
Yeah, it was both substantively and like perception-wise a disaster for them. So this time, I got to say, and that team is turned over almost entirely. Like it's almost totally different people.
Right.
And then the media, we have the sense that they're still feeling out who they're going to try and put the thumb on the scale for. So
Bernie is still running though, right?
It looks like he's running. Yeah.
You want to know something that's really stupid, but it changed my opinion of him? He was being grilled by someone at the airport with a camera, and he was pretending to talk on the phone, but you could tell he wasn't really on the phone. The phone was white, and I saw that, and I was like, ew, you can't do that. You can't do that. You could say, I'm not giving impromptu interviews, thank you very much, and keep walking. Like, if you want to interview me, do it through the correct channels. But he didn't do that. He pretended to be on the phone. It's a weird thing, because if you're willing to do that, like that's just deceptive.
Especially if you can actually see the deception, which
you can see it in the video. You can see the video. The fucking phone is not on. It's like you can see his text messages while he's and he's like, and the guy's saying to him, "You're not on the phone. I can tell you're not on the phone." It's like, and he keeps walking. It's like, I know that's a stupid thing but it's like, huh.
We all suss out details about different people in different ways, and it's like, I think one reason I'm so grateful for this opportunity is it's like, you actually can get a sense of different people in different environments, and it does end up impacting your perception. So, I mean, people made decisions on much lesser data points than that.
Oh, sure.
Let's put it that way.
Remember, what the fuck's his name from Vermont? Who, Howard Dean?
The Dean Scream, man. The freaking
New Hampshire? Is that what he's from?
He was from Vermont.
It was Vermont, yeah. That Scream killed him, sank him.
Do you remember the Chappelle Show parody? The Chappelle Show parody of that was hysterical.
That's funny. But the fact that it was just because it was allowed, like, as a person who works in front of audiences a lot, when you're yelling into a microphone, like you hear, like, especially if you don't have monitors in front of you, what you hear is like everything. You hear the crowd screaming, you hear everything. And if you're yelling into that microphone, you're not realizing what it sounds like as a recording. But with him, it's like, yeah! And that was it. One scream. Imagine that one scream literally changed the course of that man's life. One impulsive
moment. It might have
moment.
changed the course of the nation's history.
It's crazy. I don't know if that would happen today. I think, especially post-Trump, one thing that has happened is we're willing to forgive so much more. You know?
I mean, in some ways, yeah. In some ways, no, man. I mean, I feel like, like some people... more forgiving than others for different things.
For sure. Different things. Yeah, there's certainly, it varies.
But it would be interesting to imagine what the Dean scream would result in today. Hopefully, I'm not the person that tests it out.
Yeah, don't scream. Please don't scream.
All right, so what apparently is Joe's objection to Bernie Sanders, which is what made him, quote unquote, change his opinion about Bernie Sanders and him being deceptive, is legitimately the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So apparently the video he's referencing is something that a bunch of right-wing, websites jumped on, and if you type in like Bernie Sanders fakes phone call in Google, you'll just see a bunch of right-wing sites because they're using that as ammunition to smear him and to go after him. But basically he's just, he's fake talking on the phone to, brush off someone asking him a question. So you're telling me this guy has a record of decades upon decades, where I think he wrote a letter in like the 70s saying that, we need to, recognize gay marriage as legal and all this other kind of stuff. And I think he said something about legalizing pot too. We're talking about a dude with like a decades upon decades record of being on the right side of history and being correct and having the same positions, where he voted against the Iraq War when he was in the House, and I don't know if the vote took place in 02 or 03, but he voted against it. In fact, he gave a very prophetic speech as to what is going to happen, and he ended up being completely right, talking about who's going to end up filling the gap after Saddam is removed, how many people are going to perish in the war. So we're talking about Bernie fucking Sanders here. This guy, he didn't offer, not in that clip, he didn't offer Bernie Sanders any compliments in that clip whatsoever. And he says that what changed his opinion of Bernie Sanders is not that, and these things aren't true, I'm just making them up as hypotheticals, that Bernie Sanders, it turns out, didn't support blank in history, or it turns out that Bernie Sanders was funded by blank, right? And none of this stuff is true, obviously, but I'm giving you hypotheticals. It's none of that. It doesn't have to do with policy positions or record or anything like that whatsoever. What it has to do with is him faking being on the phone to brush off some douchey reporter, which was then used as as ammunition by a bunch of right-wing smear merchants. That's your objection? That's what changed your opinion about Bernie Sanders? Your opinion was swayed by that? Dude, Joe, if that's honestly what swayed your opinion about Bernie Sanders, I would be really, really disappointed in you, and I would really feel, I would be disappointed. I'd be like, dude, how could you possibly be so much of a simpleton to have that as your objection to Bernie Sanders? Bernie Sanders, the guy who's been fighting for Medicare for all forever. He's been the one proposing the bills. He's been the one who's changed our national dialogue, and AOC is kind of his offshoot. But, dude, I can't believe it. And I've seen some good stuff from Joe on Bernie, but I've also seen some bad stuff. So I think when he was talking to Kyle, he was trying to make the argument that like Bernie's really old and out of shape and stuff like that, which is totally not true. He's not out of shape, and he's healthy, and that's what we see by him campaigning like crazy. It just seems like he's got something, weird against him. I'm really not sure what it is. And also, I think if you go and watch his talk with Colin Moriarty, who's the libertarian guy, he actually, he ends up jumping on the bandwagon of shitting on Bernie Sanders. So Bernie, and Joe kind of does this every podcast, but do I even have to acknowledge and explain, or do I even have to explain to you how stupid that kind of a quote-unquote objection to Bernie Sanders is. That's legitimately the dumbest objection I've ever heard in my entire life. And if that's what, dictates, oh man, that was so deceptive. Whoa, dude. If we elect him as president, we don't know what he's going to do, because all he has like a 40-year record of marching with Martin Luther King Jr. when he gave his I Have a Dream speech and getting arrested. Whoa, so fucking deceptive. Come on, dude. Get your shit together, Joe. What are you doing? Anyways, the other points mentioned in this, Yang mentions how Bernie was he was kneecapped in the media. Also weird that Yang had a buddy in the media who knew about the inside stuff. Like, who's your buddy in the media? What kind of connects you got, G? That's kind of weird too. But anyways, obviously Bernie Sanders was kneecapped by the media. We know this. We saw what Ed Schultz said. We know about Bernie Sanders being kneecapped. That is so 100% true. It's not even debatable at this point. And I believe there was even like a Harvard study that showed that he was boxed out by the mainstream media because the mainstream media wants the status quo. And what we're seeing now is CNN is Kamala Harris's top contributor. So they have these big ass single person donations of like $5,000 and shit. And then they give her a town hall. It's like, wow, okay, this is kind of interesting to say the least. I wonder why they're giving her, a town hall. And what they did to Bernie Sanders in 2016 is now what they're doing to Tulsi Gabbard in 2020. That's what they're doing now. So she's not getting any mainstream media coverage now, the same way that Bernie Sanders wasn't getting any mainstream media coverage back in 2016. And then the last point I want to make here is Yang hilariously says that the DNC has turned a new leaf and now they're not doing anything. That's so crazy because I'm actually going to go on to talk about Kamala Harris having a bunch of endorsements in California, superdelegates in California, who, before everyone has announced, before a single debate has happened, Kamala Harris doesn't even have a fucking platform on her fucking campaign website. And they've already, I think there's 5 endorsements. Gavin Newsom, I think Ted Lieu, Barbara Lee. There are a bunch of superdelegates who have already endorsed her before the election has even started. That's not democracy, and I'm going to get into this in another story, but this is not a partisan thing. If it were Bernie Sanders getting all these superdelegates, I would be pissed because superdelegates shouldn't exist in the first place. They need to be abolished because they are not democratic even in the slightest. Let the people in the Democratic Party vote whoever the fuck they want to vote for. I don't care about your superdelegate. And as long as the superdelegate stays in existence, there's no way for the Democratic Party to claim in any way, shape, or form that they are not influencing, the will of the people and the result of the will of the people. There's no way, I repeat, no way for them to make such argument because it is flat out ridiculous and flat out false. And I'm going to get into that in another segment that I'm going to do. But the fact that Yang even said that, knowing that superdelegates still exist and what's going on right now with all these endorsements for Kamala, I don't know what's going on with that one either. That's kind of weird, but I think that obviously Joe's very stupid objection to Bernie Sanders is far more alarming. The fact that his position on Bernie Sanders is essentially dictated by Bernie Sanders, pretending to get a phone call to dodge some douchey reporter, which the segment ended up being, used by a bunch of right-wing smear merchants. It's just embarrassing, Joe. What are you doing?